So we're joined live by Alex and Tyler Mifflin, who you will know as the Water Brothers. Through their eco-adventure series, they have explored the world from Mexico to the Caribbean, India to Tanzania and more, finding out the most important water stories of our time. So today they're going to share a little bit about their adventures and some of the solutions to climate change and water conservation that they've come across in their many years of amazing work. Without further ado, thank you guys so much for joining us, and take it away.
Good morning, everyone. Yeah, we're really happy to be here and speak to all of you across Canada and the US. So we are the Water Brothers. For the last 6 years, we've been going around the world. We've actually traveled to over 30 countries, filming over 25 different documentaries about the biggest challenges facing our freshwater and oceans all around the world. Are you having trouble hearing us?
So I can hear you. I don't know if it's one class that might not be able to.
Okay. Well, I think the sound's on. Okay, so yeah, we've been going all around the world looking at the biggest challenges facing our water, our oceans, and our fresh water around the world. But not just talking about what the problems are. You know, that's easy. There's a lot of problems and a lot of threats facing water. But more importantly, we're talking about solutions. We are really, geared up to engage people and make them more aware of what's going on and what we can really do to live in harmony with our water resources. Because water is the essence of all life on Earth. All living things require water to survive. And that's why it's so critical that we do everything possible to protect it. And there's a lot of reasons why climate change is such a big threat to water, which we're going to get into today. Short little trailer so you can get a sense of what the types of things we film in our show and what we do. So we'll just kick things off showing you that trailer.
Awesome. While you guys are getting screen share up, I just want to note for the classes that if the class can't hear, you can go on YouTube. I just passed you guys the link so you can watch there, okay? Perfect. And the trailer's up, guys. Go for it.
We're getting our last look at the mainland right now. Next stop, Cocos Island.
It's so cool to think that we're floating at the lowest point on Earth right now.
Life as we know it requires living water for its survival.
We're really excited to get into the water because the entire reef ecosystem changes at night. All right! It's huge. Woo! If we can't get this problem solved, we'll be out of business.
So quite amazingly, we've come to the new headwaters of the lower Jordan River.
How could it be allowed to get like this? They're the start of what will be a very difficult journey for them.
This is ours, and this is where we're all from. We have to be a good steward of it because there's nobody else to take care of it but us.
Let's see. All right. Let me go back here. There we go. You guys got us back now? All right. So that was the trailer for our third season. And really, as you can see, we look at a lot of stories around the health of our oceans, different river systems, access to clean water, sanitation, overfishing, basically any of the really big environmental challenges we face in the world today. That's the kind of stories that we do with our documentary series. And what we really do is try to look at these challenges through the lens of water. We look at all these challenges, they're very complex, and we try to make it really, simplify it down for everyone to really understand how it is that water is the central theme or, is a really important factor in this environmental story and the challenge. And by looking at through the lens of water, it really helps us and our viewers hopefully understand how they're connected to that challenge, even though the problem might be happening on the other side of the planet. From where they live, but how they're connected to that issue through water and what we can all do to help solve that problem by better harmonizing our relationship with fresh water, with our oceans, through our purchasing habits and sort of, daily consumer activities. So it's really a unique way to look at these challenges and really hopefully arm people with the knowledge of how they can be part of the solution.
And so one of the topics we cover a lot in the show, we've done it in many episodes, is climate change, because climate change is really a story about water. Because the ways that we're always going to experience and suffer from climate change is really how climate change impacts the water around us. So we have, we often associate climate change with just global warming, and yes, the planet is heating up. But one of the consequences of heating up the atmosphere is that it's actually able to hold more moisture. So you have the planet heating up. The oceans actually absorb a lot of the heat, that excess heat. And when you have oceans warming, it can mean more evaporation. And you have the atmosphere, when it warms up, it can hold more moisture. So that's one of the reasons why we're seeing this pattern, this trend of more intense rainfall events, more intense hurricanes and storms, rising sea levels. So that means we have more fresh water in the ice caps and the glaciers melting. So we have all this ice on the planet at the poles. It's melting. That's fresh water going into the ocean, which raises sea level. And then we also have the oceans, as they warm themselves, they expand. They actually expand. So we have rising sea levels. And when you have rising sea levels, that means salt water is going deeper inland. That can mean the salt water gets into the soil deep inland and into the groundwater deep inland. So we have groundwater that's getting too salty, like water that you take out of a well. And then we also have farmland that gets too salty too. And then you can't grow crops on there. So these are some of the ways that we're experiencing and suffer from climate change that we might not always think about. Of course, we also have more intense droughts. So we have more rainfall. We have more water in some places because of climate change. And then we also have less water. So we have these droughts, these really intense droughts, which are becoming more common in areas where, they might already experience droughts, but now they're happening more often than they used to. And so that's why we really have to be concerned, because it affects everything. It affects how we grow our food. It affects the cities we live in, our ability to live on the coastline. And it can also cause people to move in large numbers from areas. Because what happens when your well is too salty, or your soil becomes too salty, or it's too many droughts, or too many wildfires? You have to move. And this is another consequence of climate change as it impacts water, is that can actually force people to move on large scales. And we're seeing that happen around the world. So it's a very complex issue. But one of the ways that we can simplify it and make these connections clearer to people is thinking about climate change through water and how it impacts water. Because ultimately, that's how climate change is going to affect us. It's through water. And a lot of the solutions are water sort of based solutions, if you want to think about it that way. So we really got to think about climate change through water.
And so Alex and I, one thing we always try to, people often, as Al mentioned, think of climate change as just a story about global warming, or they think of it's a story that's only affecting places like in the Arctic or in Antarctica. But as Al just mentioned, these things affect people across the globe, no matter where you live. And it's affecting us right now. It's not some problem that's, down the road. We are already experiencing climate change that's having massive impacts on agriculture, how we grow and produce our food, our cities. So this is a problem that's affecting everyone on the planet right here and right now. And so it is up to all of us to try and do some things about it, whether that's small actions in our daily lives, or, make, as you guys get older and, putting pressure on governments to enact better policies and regulations that we can help speed up how we sort of adapt and manage the changes that are already happening and coming our way. Mm-hmm. So Alex and I, as Al mentioned, we've done a number of episodes looking at climate change, from looking at it in places like the Middle East, looking at it in the Arctic, but also looking at it here in Canada. That's in places that are a bit closer to where most of the, our population lives. So one of the big things that Al mentioned, the glacier, sort of the Antarctica and the Arctic, but it's also affecting glaciers on mountain ranges all across the world. And in particular in Canada, we have some big mountain ranges in the Rockies that are a huge sort of like a water tower. As the glaciers store water over winter and builds up over time, and that water, as it warms up, slowly melts down the mountains into rivers and streams and goes across the country, and really is a big source of water for our agriculture, how we grow food. And so we did an episode looking at how climate change is impacting Canada, from farmers to cities. So we want to show you a clip from that episode that shows you a little segment we did on one of Canada's biggest glaciers and how the melting and the warming is impacting that glacier and all people all
the
across
country and in the U.S. as well, because as you'll see, that's connected to a big river in the U.S. known as the Columbia.
So
check that.
We're going to show you this video. One sec. Yeah.
One of the most fascinating aspects of visiting glaciers like the Athabasca is that the passage of time is so visible here. Beside me is a marker showing where the toe or terminus of the glacier stood in 1908. Just a little over a century ago, this entire valley would have been covered in ice. But since then, this glacier has receded by over 1.5 kilometers.
Atop the Athabasca, we joined hydrologist Dr. John Pomeroy, who studies the impact of climate change on Canada's water resources, and is one of several scientists who is helping to track the retreat of glaciers from the Columbia icefield.
The Columbia icefield is one of these remarkable points in North America. It's a triple point continental divide. So water out of this icefield flows towards the Athabasca River, then down the Mackenzie to the Arctic Ocean. It flows down the Saskatchewan River, which then forms the Nelson and goes into Hudson Bay after crossing all three prairie provinces. And on the BC side, it forms the Columbia River, which drains across British Columbia and then through Washington State and Oregon to the Pacific Ocean. So you've got 3 oceans fed from this, and millions of people rely on the rivers that start at this point.
This ice field feeds some of the biggest river systems in North America. But as temperatures rise and precipitation patterns shift, this water tower of the West has become one of the first casualties of climate change.
Have to remember that all glaciers are doing is storing snowfall from previous years. It's the amount of rain and snow that's driving the hydrology and the stream flow and filling the lakes around the Rockies. And that's been changing as well. So there's more rainfall, less snowfall over time as the temperature is going up. And that means that the snowpacks are not lasting as long into the summer as they used to.
When more rain falls instead of snow, the consequences can be disastrous.
In 2013, of course, there was a tremendously heavy rainfall that hit the Rockies in June of that year when there was a late-line snowpack above Banff. And many areas had rain on snow, but it was mainly a rainfall-driven flood event that hit Calgary on June 20th and 21st and caused tremendous destruction. It was the most destructive natural disaster in Canadian history, driven by intensely heavy rainfall in the mountains. In previous years, in June, a heavy precipitation would come with snow in the high Rockies. So it would have been good skiing instead of a natural disaster.
John showed us large sections of ice that were covered in black dust and soot from forest fires. As this dark material builds up, it absorbs solar radiation and melts the ice beneath it, further speeding up the loss of glaciers.
So it's really all interconnected. I mean, you have your warmer, drier temperatures, which make forests more susceptible to fires, and the fires can have this, spin-off effect on glaciers.
Yes, and not just fires, dust storms. In a really dry year, we'll get more dust storms. And sometimes they can be at a great distance, coming from China or from the western United States or dry parts of British Columbia, and then come a great distance and deposit on here.
Rising temperatures have not only triggered the loss of glaciers across the Rockies, but have also caused significant declines in spring snow cover.
We're getting a benefit from this extra water coming off, and that comes in late summer, and the fastest melt rates are coming off in the hottest, driest summers. So when Western Canada is having a drought and the forest fires are burning, everything's going, there's not much other source of stream flow, that's when these glaciers are really important. The problem is we've become used to that. And so we expect every time a drought comes in, the glaciers will kick in and make it not quite so bad for our rivers. And we've had tremendous advantages due to this as well. We haven't had to build as many dams and water storage facilities in the Canadian prairies and in British Columbia as parts of the western United States have, because we've relied on glaciers and snow to bank our water into the summer and all that.
Canada is the second largest producer of hydroelectricity in the world, and hydropower accounts for nearly 60% of all electricity produced in the country. So any changes to stream flows will have a significant impact on energy production, as well as the number and size of dams we will need to build in the future.
The warming that has occurred already even if we stopped emitting any further greenhouse gases tomorrow into the atmosphere, this Athabasca Glacier is doomed. The rate of its recession right now, this will disappear, as will most of the glaciers in the Canadian Rockies.
So how much longer does it have left?
It's estimates about 60 years for this. So we're around 2050, 2060, depending on how things go. But those estimates were done before we had the last 3 summers of record mass balance. So my personal estimate is that we could see the end of the lower part of the Athabasca within my lifetime, even in the 2030s, 2040s.
Between 1920 and 2005, we may have lost as many as 300 glaciers in the Canadian Rocky Mountain National Parks alone. And what we see from this is that if the trend continues, we could lose as much as 90% of our glacial ice by the end of this century. But the most important thing we learned from this is the warming is causing the ice to disappear is also affecting snowpack and snow cover, and that changes water security.
So it was a bit of a long video there, but everything in there was really important to talk about these connections with climate change and water. And right at the end there, you heard that professors talk about snowpack. So we often think of climate change affecting the ice at the poles or glaciers, but it's snow anywhere. Maybe the classroom in Texas doesn't know much about snow, and maybe this doesn't apply to them, but I think all the other classrooms involved, they know a thing or two about snow. So no matter where you live, if you live in a place that normally gets snow, this is a way that you're going to be impacted by it, because when you have rain instead of snow, so you get a big rainfall event in the winter, and it causes all that snow that's already there to melt. That's a big problem, because we often rely on the snow melting slowly. Right, as spring begins and sort of as the end of winter, we want that to come out slowly. When we have these big rainfall events instead of snow, all that water then rushes out, and it can cause big changes in the ecosystem, and that means more water is rushing away instead of getting stored in groundwater or slowly leaving streams and rivers. And that's something that a lot of our ecosystems here in sort of more northern areas, they really depend on that. And we depend on those water resources just for all the things we use in our daily life. So it's a lot of reasons why we have to be concerned about what's happening. And why we did that episode is because we wanted people to know that, like Tyler said, climate change is not some phenomenon that's happening away from us in the Arctic or in the middle of the Pacific. It's right in our own backyards. And the warning signs are already there.
And what's really interesting about climate change and with these more intense rainfall events is that it can be a contributing factor to other really big problems like plastic pollution in our oceans or in our lakes and rivers. So, when I was saying you have these big rainfall events or things melt, that can flood big areas of cities. And then those cities, like all the plastic or any garbage on the streets, the municipal waste, the treatment plants can't handle all that water. So they often have to release untreated water into the river or to a lake or potentially right to the ocean. So that's also how a lot of plastic is entering into our oceans, is through big rainfall events that brings, sort of pushes that the plastic or garbage or pollutants, chemicals into our lakes, rivers, and oceans, which is a really bad thing. So there's tons. That's just one example. There's plenty more of different spin-off effects that climate change is having, not just on water, and warm temperatures, but things like plastic pollution.
And we have one other video we're going to show with you today. And then I think soon after that, we're going to try and do some questions, because we really want to make sure we have lots of time for that. But we're going to show you one other video about warming lakes. And then we'll talk a little bit about why that matters so much. So, yeah, we'll just go to the video.
Let's see. One sec here. Oh, did I close it? I think I closed it. One sec here, guys. Sorry, just want to pull it up here.
No hurry, all good.
Well, there we go. Yeah,
oh, it's gonna open. It's 360. Sorry, guys.
That's okay.
One sec here. I'm getting it on. There we go. All right, I'm gonna share this screen with you. One sec. do the entire screen. I'm going to go here. All right.
The left side.
This one here. All right, guys, let's check this one out. It's about warming lakes.
We studied 235 lakes around the world, and these represent more than 50% of the world's freshwater supply. And what we found was that 90% of the world's lakes are warming. Several regions warmed faster than other regions. So, for example, the Great Lakes region has been warming at much higher rates than the rest of the world. So 2 to 3 times faster than the global average. Lake Superior is the second fastest warming lake in the world, which you might not expect because it's such a big lake. We thought the smaller lakes would warm the fastest, but some of these really large lakes are warming at really rapid rates as well.
One major reason why Canadian lakes are warming faster is due to the longer exposure to warm air temperatures because of reduced ice coverage, which is also speeding up evaporation and causing water levels to drop in some areas.
As we have increasingly hot summers, we can expect longer and more intense algal blooms.
As heavy bursts of rainfall become more common, more phosphorus will wash into lakes from farmland and municipal sewage systems, leading to more algae blooms that can be toxic to humans, pets, and wildlife.
So the period when we're not allowed to swim in lakes, when we have to look for alternative sources of water because the cyanobacterial toxins that are a health hazard cannot be filtered out with the algae. So water quality is certainly directly linked to climate change.
Right. Here.
Okay, so that video just talks. It's a short one, but again, it's some really important points about warming. So we have our lakes are warming, and in places like Canada and through a lot of the U.S., they're warming at twice the rate of the global average. And 90% of the world's lakes that they studied were warming. So and they studied half the lakes in the world. So they did cover a lot. And so the evidence is there, and this really matters. And right there at the end, when we were talking about algae blooms, just for those of you who may not be familiar with that, is that in all types of water, you have plants that grow called algae. And there's many different species of algae. And some of those species that do really well in warm water, when they grow out of control, they produce toxins, and these types of algae are known as cyanobacteria or blue-green algae, and these can be really dangerous for drinking water. So when we have these big algae blooms in fresh water, it can actually make our water, our lakes, undrinkable, and our treatment plants
unusable. You can't go in them.
So this is one of the consequences of climate change that we were talking about at the beginning. This is why it matters. This is how we're connected to climate change through water. Because how we're actually going to suffer from climate change. Imagine if you can no longer turn on your tap because your source of drinking water has a toxic algae bloom in it. And this is not something that's just going to happen in the future. It's already happening. There's the city of Toledo, Ohio in 2014, the summer of 2014, they had to stop using their drinking water for several days because of a toxic blue-green algae bloom. So this is already happening in the Great Lakes, right in all of our backyards here. It's happening right now. We do need to be concerned. It's a very complex topic, talking about climate change and water, but we hope we gave you a little bit of a rundown about some of the reasons why we need to be concerned. Warming, rising sea levels, melting ice, melting snow, how this impacts algae blooms, how it impacts our cities. These issues are all interconnected, and they can sometimes be complex. And we just hope that through our show, and you can maybe learn a little bit about some of these connections, and it can help make it a little bit simpler for people to understand so that they can be empowered with knowledge. But